want to open a conversation about those weaponized words that can truly destroy a person's self-esteem over time. Let's get to it. Welcome and welcome back to the Common Ego community. My name is Christina, and today we're talking about the ways in which a narcissist or another toxic person will attack your sense of self, your self-esteem, and your self-worth. There are specific phrases or types of phrases that they will use to do this, and over time they're highly effective. So you might be wondering, well, why would someone do this? What kind of person does this? And for the answer, we can essentially look to any bully anywhere. So a bully is someone who feels better about themselves by putting someone else down. And that's essentially what highly narcissistic people do. So digging a little bit deeper into that, we can see that, well, they must not feel so good about themselves if they're doing this to someone else. If they are trying to bully someone in order to control them or to have power over them, it's probably because they're feeling pretty powerless and out of control themselves. But someone who's highly narcissistic does not project that to the world. They want you to think the opposite. Deep down, there are quite a few insecurities, and I'm going to cover those in my next video. So if you aren't already subscribed, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss it. So now let's get into the 10 phrases that a narcissist or another toxic, emotionally abusive person will use to attack, to essentially over time destroy a person's sense of self and self-esteem. And as I go through this list, I'd suggest maybe taking notes on the ones that you've heard. Because if you've heard a bunch of these and you're feeling bad about yourself, I want you to know that it is not your fault. This is by design. And recognizing that is the first step to having your own moment of transformation, your own turning point where things go from bad to better. So get that notepad ready and let's jump in. The first phrase that a narcissist will use to attack your self-esteem is, how could you even bring that up when you know there are so many more important things to talk about? Or, this other person, they have it so much worse than you. How dare you complain? And this is something that I dealt with personally. I was with a very highly narcissistic person and I was struggling with something. I was at a very low point in my life and I was just really having a hard time. And so, I kind of talk about the hard time that I was having. And the person that I was with compared me to somebody who was physically disabled and said, well, how could you complain about what you have going on when this person right here is doing all the things with a disability? And the really big problem with this one is that it triggers shame within you. And this can be really difficult to overcome. And if you dealt with this one, I want to share something, a realization that I had after the fact. I wish I'd had it in that moment. The realization I had was that that's not a normal thing for people to do. If we dissect this one and look at what the person is doing, they are literally standing there and shaming you. How dare you? How dare you complain when all these other people have it so much worse? Essentially what they're saying is you're weak and they're strong. If anyone should be complaining, it should be them, not you. They want you to feel ashamed for having the feelings that you have. And that is not okay. That is not something that a person with good intentions does. It simply is not. There's really no gray area here. This is gaslighting, and it's really an awful thing to do to somebody. So the second phrase that someone might use to make you feel bad about yourself is, you need to do this thing for me because my time is so much more important than your time. Now, it doesn't always come out that way, but what we're talking about here in this one is entitlement. So the other person is going to send the message that they feel entitled to your time, that they have something going on, they have a problem, and you need to rearrange your schedule in order to accommodate, to make their lives easier. And it's not a question. It's not would you mind, please, I could use some help. Could you do this for me? It is an expectation that you will, because they know that their time is more important, and they expect you to know that too. And over time, when this happens subtly, it can be very difficult. It seems like something that wouldn't get to you, but when someone is just expecting that they're put on a pedestal, that their needs are always being met and yours comes second, those actions, even if they aren't words, those actions can really make you feel less than worthy. The third phrase someone will use to destroy your self-esteem is, if you do this one more time, if you ask me this question once more, I am out. I'm leaving. I'm out the door. This is something that narcissists do very, very often. You always get the sense that they have one foot out the door because they kind of do. And this is another way that they make you feel like their needs are more important than yours. Because let's say you're asking them questions about how they're treating you or things that they're doing that you feel like they're lying about. But then you get the sense, they give you the sense that you're not allowed to ask those questions. And this is a form of control, but it's not an obvious form of control. We always see control as something along the lines of, you can't talk to this person, or you can't wear that out in public. But control can be much more subtle. It can be just sending the message that you cannot ask me about this topic, or I'm out of here. And what they're saying is, my needs are more important than yours. My need to hide things from you is more important than your need to get the information. A fourth phrase you might hear from someone who is trying to destroy your self-esteem is, yeah, your ex was right, you're a mess. Or you're jealous, or you're crazy. And it might not be an ex, it might be your mother, it might be your sister, it might be an ex-friend. But they're using someone else to put you down. So they're not actually saying the thing, they're not the ones, they're the good guy, right? They're just kind of agreeing with someone else that you're the bad guy. And this is a form of triangulation. It's a way to devalue you while the other person kind of keeps their hands a little bit clean. It wasn't them who came up with the idea that you were crazy or whatever. It was this other person. So if you're going to be mad at someone, you can be mad at them. But really, in all of this, you're the problem. And that's the important takeaway. Another thing you may hear from a narcissist who's trying to break your self-esteem is, you ruined my life. They might say that you tricked them into committing to the relationship or starting a family. They might say that you stood in the way of their dreams, that you advised them not to do something when it was really their decision not to do something. For example, let's say they were going to go back to school and you provided a listening ear for them to work through that decision themselves, and they decided not to. But that's something that, because you're a part of the conversation, they can hold against you and say that it was all your fault. And if you have any sort of trust in this person, it's going to make you feel bad because you might start to believe it. You might start to believe that maybe you had a hand in making this person miserable. And if you're in this place, I want to say that that's not true. The other person made their decisions, right? And maybe they made decisions that led to other things. But ultimately, it all comes back to self. We all make our own decisions. And we're all responsible for them. So sitting around blaming other people, it's not only not productive, but it can be damaging to the other person's self-esteem. Again, not a nice thing to do. So the next thing a narcissist will say to make you feel bad about yourself is, I'm sorry you thought I did something hurtful. And again, there are lots of variations to this. And I call this the faux apology. If you're interested, I have a video on that and I will link to that in the description. But this, while it sounds like an apology, it's very clear that it's not an apology. It is shifting the blame from the narcissist to you. Because essentially what they're saying is that you misconstrued what their words or their intent. And if there's a whole lot of gaslighting going on beyond this, this can also make you feel like you're not capable of following things, right? Like you're not capable of understanding someone's clear intent. And so if you buy into that way of thinking, the next time something like this comes up, you may start to question yourself and think, well, maybe I don't fully understand, what they meant, or maybe this hurtful situation is somehow my fault. And with that, let's transition into the next thing a narcissist will say to make you feel bad about yourself. And that is, it's your fault I'm this way. So this is a more bold way of saying it, that it's you that's the problem, not me. And with this one, usually they're excusing their own bad behavior. So if they get angry and start screaming, fly off the handle, it's your fault I'm doing this. If they start throwing things, break something, it's your fault I am this way. If you just didn't question them, or if you behaved differently, then they wouldn't act out. You're so awful is what they want you to think. You're so awful that you bring out problems in somebody who does not have problems. And breaking this one down really comes back to the concept of responsibility, of personal responsibility. We're all responsible for our own behavior and reactions. So the next thing a narcissist can say to destroy your self-esteem is, if you weren't so gullible, you would have known the truth all along. Again, there are some patterns developing here, right? There's a lot of blame shifting. It's actually pretty common when you're dealing with a more grandiose narcissist for them to blame you for believing their lies. So they may have lied to you, but instead of taking responsibility for doing the bad thing of lying, they're saying, well, of course I lied to you because you're so gullible, because you have this character flaw. And yeah, I mean, I used it to my advantage, but it's not my problem, it's yours. But when you break that down, yeah, being gullible is not a good thing, but it's usually not hurtful to other people, whereas lying is. The worst behavior is the one that they're trying to sweep under the rug. And they're trying to get you to take responsibility for whatever it is that they think you did or are. And this can come up in a lot of different ways. It's not always about lying. And with that, let's transition into the next thing narcissists will say to destroy your self-esteem. And that is, if you weren't so stupid, I wouldn't have to repeat myself so often. And again, there are variations to this one, but what we're talking about here is just outright putting you down, blatantly insulting your intelligence. And for the cherry on top here with this phrase, it's because you're this awful thing. That's why I have to treat you badly. I wouldn't talk to you like a child if I didn't think that you had the mental capacity of a child. So if you haven't been there, you might be tempted to think that this is something that you would not put up with, that you would walk away as soon as somebody called you stupid, because they're telling you exactly who they are in that moment, right? But having been in a relationship like this, I can tell you that the biggest enemy you have in that moment is the benefit of the doubt. Because in relationships like these, we tend to give people the benefit of the doubt way too often. And that can keep you stuck. So when someone says something like this, it sounds like it's coming from a place of anger. And you might end up telling yourself that they just were saying things they didn't mean because they were angry. And while yes, people do say things that they don't mean when they're angry, be careful about giving the benefit of the doubt when it is not deserved. So another phrase that a narcissist will use to destroy your self-esteem is, yeah, that's the last time I ask for your advice, or that's the last time I ask for your help. And sometimes people may say things like this jokingly. Of course, what I'm talking about is not a joke. What I'm talking about here is somebody implying that your help is not worth anything, and maybe even is more detrimental than good. I'm talking about somebody that's implying that you are incapable of doing whatever it is that you are trying to do. And this, just like all the rest of the things on the list, is an attack on your self-esteem. Because if somebody is telling you over and over and over again in various different ways that you're not good enough, that you're not smart enough, that you can't do the things that you want to do, you're not capable, eventually, if you continue spending time with that person, that stuff is going to sink in. Those beliefs sink in. And we start to believe those things about ourselves, even if only on a subconscious level. And that can end up keeping you feeling stuck. Even after you get out of the relationship, you may find that you feel like you're in this stuck place where you can't get out. You find yourself procrastinating and overthinking things, and you're having trouble making decisions. These are all byproducts of having been in a relationship like this. And it doesn't matter what kind of relationship it is. Yes, there are differences to having a highly narcissistic and abusive parent and having a highly narcissistic and abusive partner in a relationship. But we are talking about a cause and effect situation. And that is my point, that it is not your fault. From here, if you want to improve things and if you want to have more confidence and more self-esteem, to build yourself back up, you can. You have that power and you have that control. And this is that part in the story where things turned around for me. When I realized that the person I was with was absolutely hands down making me feel worse than I ever remembered feeling before. And it was a very noticeable difference. I started to realize that there wasn't much of a choice here for me. If I stayed in this relationship, that is what was going to be my life. But like many of us, it was very much a roller coaster where the relationship went through cycles. There was the love bombing, the devaluation, the discard, and then the Hoover. So many times, I have to tell you, at that point, I don't even think I could have counted how many times I had been through it. This is around the time when I started learning about narcissism and narcissistic abuse. And I started learning that these things, that it wasn't my fault, that I was feeling the way I was feeling, that I was feeling so defeated. And it didn't mean that I was weak. And even though I described this as a turning point and a transformational moment, it was. But it wasn't like I snapped my fingers and I suddenly became a strong and confident person. Healing is a journey, and so is rewiring those old programs. So as you're looking back at your notes and noticing how many of these you could relate to, I would say if you could relate to 3 or more, you're going to find this next video super helpful. So I'm going to link to a video right here where I talk about some pretty sneaky manipulation tactics that have very similar effects to the stuff that we're talking about here today. So go ahead and watch that video. Be sure you're subscribed, and I will see you next week.